Welcome back to the RatRig V-Core-4 build. In the last video, we installed all of the Z-axis components. Basically everything except for the table. We got the linear rails, the lead screws, the motors, all that stuff is in place. So all of those motion components for the Z-axis are done. In this video, we're gonna go into the Y-axis and setting up the rails. First components I started with, I have everything pretty much laid out. I didn't want to go through all the putting everything together on video again. So I've got these components. These are the stops for the Y-axis. Those will go on first, actually, and then we have the rails. And I've already prepared the rails. I have all the T-nuts set on there. There's actually way too many holes, so we're using every other one. And that's actually what the instructions call for. So we'll jump right into that. So the very first component here is this stop. The latch is in here. So it's kind of hard to show, but basically there's this little groove here. It fits in on the other side like this. I think you'll see it on the other camera angle. So we're gonna put this in really quick. Oh, that's not a good sound. Not with 3D printed parts, but I don't think I broke anything. We'll call it good for now. So, we're gonna install the rail now. Using the alignment pieces just like we did with the Z-axis components. And something's stuck, so there we go. Okay, so I'm pushing it as far forward as I can. And then I'm going to give it just a little bit of tension all the way along. Now that once I get these alignment pieces in again. Okay, so that should be good and centered. We should be able to start tightening these. Okay, so we'll give just a little bit of tension on these end pieces. That should make, so I don't have to have these in there anymore. Okay, so that rail should be in place. Let's take a look at that. Make sure you get a good view. You can see that rail all the way along there. So now we're just going to go ahead and do that on the other side too. Okay, so that's in. Exactly the same as the other. We're going to put these alignment pieces on, get this where we want it. Again, not really sure what's holding that up there, but we're going to push it forward as far as we can. Move that out of the way. Go back down. So yeah, you can see that screw is stuck up a little bit. And again, I'm not tightening these. I'm really just taking the extra slack or the extra travel out of that screw. So when I go to tighten them, it's just about half a turn. That one's already kind of tight, so we're going to loosen that just to make sure. Get everything good and aligned. I think we're happy with that. Okay, that side's done. Those rails are in. So now we move on to the next step. Now, honestly, this is the fun part. The part I was looking forward to. So this is a little bit different setup than a lot of other printers. It is COREXY, but then it has what's called hybrid, which actually adds additional motors just to pull the Y-axis back and forth, which makes it move faster. And then when it comes to IDEX, there's a little bit more going on there too, and we'll get into that later. But right now, I'm going to start assembling the initial motors that will drive this, and we'll start building onto it. But these assemblies are kind of cool, so we're gonna jump into it. So these are the motor mounts we start with. In a previous step, they had us put these in here just so that we could use this to level the corners and make sure the plate or the T-slot on both sides is level. I didn't like that as well, so I just put these on, but I didn't actually use it for that. Anyway, now it's directing me to take 2 of these off. So I think we'll get the motor mounted and then we'll do that. All right, so this is our first one. To start with, we've just got these 3 countersunk screws. Let's try that again. So we'll give those each a little extra torque. So maybe I should build both these simultaneously. That'd be kind of cool. It doesn't really say to do that, but you know, why not? Because they should be mirrors of each other, so that's how my brain works. Easier to see if I do them both at the same time. Little tiny screws here. Just give you an idea of what I'm working on. Putting in these small little countersunk screws. And then there's some parts right over here. I'm just going to show you really quick. Bunch of different bearings. These ones have a little flange on them. Okay, so there's a flange on these ones. These ones don't have a flange. And then we've got some spacers, multiple different sizes of different spacers here, and these little shims. Say they're precision 1mm shims. Let's see. Various screws, some of these longer suckers too, and our pulleys. All right, so moving on to the next step. So I'm gonna set this one aside, go back to this. So it says remove these. It says remove these temporarily. It's not a big deal. So pull those out of there. That's when these come in. And so this is gonna fit like this. You can see that. It actually fits pretty well. So we're gonna drop these through here. Install these for right now. It should just sort of hold this in place temporarily. So we got that there. That's when these longer bolts come in. In this case, we have a shorter bolt goes through here. The longer bolt goes through here. So those actually fit pretty nicely there. See that? All right, we'll orient this so it matches what's in the instructions, make that a little bit easier. We got one of these going down upside down, of all things. I don't know if it says to tighten the set screw yet, but there's a flat spot on these, so we're going to make sure at least that the set screw is where it should be in regards to that flat spot. The motion components that are going to go on this. So the first step, want some of these shims, one each. All right, so this is temporarily secured. This is in place. And we're gonna start stacking the washers. I say stacking because that's just sort of how they're set up. I think what they're doing is making idler pulleys by sandwiching these together. So we take 2 of these like this. See that? The belt will roll on this. So that makes sense. So we're doing the same thing on both sides. We're gonna sandwich that here. Do another bearing sandwich on this side. Okay, you can start seeing how this is coming together. And then we have one more shim, for some reason just on this one, but not on the other. So we're gonna do another bearing sandwich over here on the one we just put the shim on. So we'll go flange, no flange, flange. So now we got these 2 set up here. Way easier to see on this camera. The other side gets a spacer, and it's calling for, so we get the 1745. And we get one of these little shorty guys on the rear one. All right, so there's that. Okay, so this again is part one of this. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna set this aside for now. We're gonna come back and do pretty much the same thing on this one. It's gonna be a little different, but we are still gonna take these off. Here we go. So again, same thing here. This is gonna fit here. So we're just gonna pop these right through again. And what I should have done, because I can always back these off, but it might make it easier if this thing quits falling apart. I'm gonna tighten these down just a tiny bit, or at least one of them. That'll hold those other bolts in place so I can quit fighting them, because that was kind of frustrating. We're gonna put the taller bolt in the center here. And then we need another one of these 45mm ones. Good view of that. So this time, so the other pulley, if we notice, that was upside down. This one's gonna go right side up. And that's so that the belts can go past each other. And looking for that flat spot. Like it says, I'm gonna do this again later, but I sure would like to have that set screw lined up where it's supposed to go. So temporarily, that is in place. So we have that. So now we're going to begin doing the bearing setup. Again, calls for a shim. This time just on this one. And I need one of those 14mm spacers on that other guy. All right, so that's obviously the 14. And we want that back here. So you can tell this one's a little different. And that's just because of where the belt's going to ride. So we have a idler sandwich over here. Then we're going to put another shim on top of this guy. And now we're going to start another one. You can see this is going to be pretty interesting once this gets going. All right. It's looking pretty cool, huh? Okay, but I'm not done yet. I need to put 2 more spacers. Glad I didn't forget that. The next step is going to take a lot more parts, so I'm going to set these aside and go gather those parts. Okay, we're moving on to the next step here. Quite a few more components, and this is going to involve actually getting these installed. You can see they're going to go up into these corners. You'll see in a second, it'll be a little more clear. We'll put this one up on that side, and then we build off of that for the additional motors. So here we have it, the finished and ready to be installed lower motors. These are the default ones for the COREXY, but the hybrid ones will be coming next, and they go up on top. So these here are the top brackets that will hold everything together. And here it's just saying to install these bearings. They just sort of press fit in there, but they don't really hold all that well. I guess the key thing here though is that the flange goes on the side with the countersink. So that part's important. But I ended up taking these out and just kind of putting in the bearings later when it made more sense. Now that we're all prepared, the next step is to begin installing those lower motors. The most difficult part here is just holding everything together because everything is kind of floating until stuff gets tightened. But honestly, if I make it look a little bit easy here, it's because I had to do it twice. Off camera, I accidentally installed them on the wrong side, had everything ready, went to put the top bracket on and realized I was on the wrong side. So now you're actually seeing me do it for the second time. This is looking a little better. All that stuff's lining up. This T-nut is not right though. One important thing to note here is that you'll want to make sure those T-nuts are installed and aligned with the holes. If you tighten everything and then come back and they're not aligned, it can be kind of a pain. But if they're close enough, you can kind of just use the Allen wrench like I'm doing here to scoot them over a little bit so they're aligned. Okay, I like how that fits. Assuming all this works out. This is supposed to go through here. So far so good. If this is the right size, I'm going to be very happy. Okay, it is. So that means we can tighten this sucker up. Alright, that's cool. Alright, let's do the other side. Oh, almost forgot something. Put those T-nuts in there. All right, well, let's call that a test fit then. This is that step I was talking about on the other side that you didn't get a chance to see me doing. And all the mix-ups with putting it on the wrong side, I'd completely forgotten to do them until now, but it was a small mistake. I'm going through this part on the video pretty quickly. This side is an exact mirror of the other one, so installing it is pretty straightforward. The other thing I want to do in here is just kind of test to make sure everything is still spinning freely for when I go to put the belts in later. I want to make sure I don't have any issues that I have to take everything apart to get to again. All right, we're back again. Different day. As much as I would have liked to keep building last night, I actually had to stop. It got pretty late. You saw everything right up to where I quit. Decided to take a break and hit it again today. So now we're out here again. I've got all the parts sort of set up on the workbench here. As you can see, we'll bring you in closer here in a second. We are getting ready to do more motor assemblies. So we're going to be zoomed in, looking close again. Let's jump right into that. This is going to be an awful lot like the other side. Or I should say the lower motors. These ones are going to go up on top. Gotta find the right bracket, make sure I'm not doing this backwards. Okay, so it shows this one, the wires. So this is going to go something like this. So the first step is going to be installing these countersunk screws. Here, get them all started and then we'll tighten them up. Okay, so we got that on. The very next step is going to be put up the gear, the pulley on. This one, remember on the other one it's either right side up or upside down. This one it wants right side up, so we'll put that one on there. And it said again, we're going to adjust these down the road. So we'll just put it in line with the flat spot on the motor shaft, give it a little bit just to hold it in place. We'll move on to the next step. The next step with this is going to be to put this guy in. This time we're putting the shim on. Remember we used these little shims before. See that? These little tiny shims. We're going to put that on first. So we're going to put that on. We're going to insert it through this hole. And then we're going to build another one of the pulleys, the pulley setup, using these little spacers. These are going to go here. Kind of hard to see. Then we're going to build another one of the, what I was calling the idler sandwiches, or the pulley sandwich. With these, then we've got another spacer we've got to put on top. I just got to make sure I have the right spacer for that. So the one on top is the 5x8x10, which is what I have in this little pouch here. So we have that there. Okay, so then the next piece, and I had these other plates out, and I was wondering when they were going to come into play, because it called them out earlier, but I didn't end up using them in that step. So I'm going to want to do this. I believe this is how these are going to fit. And this should have a pulley in it, but I didn't put that in earlier. So this is going to go like this. A bearing, I should say, not a pulley. We're going to use this again, which we did up there. Drop one of these 3mm screws in there. This is kind of going to sandwich everything together. Then I'm going to throw this on here too. Give you a little bit closer look at what I'm doing here. Maybe too close. So we got that on here. Here's our idler. And then we just sort of set this up here. And we're going to tighten all that stuff and kind of get it into place, hopefully. Yeah, that should hold. There is one of those in place. Not sure why they broke broke that up the way they did. They honestly kind of made it more confusing than it had to be. So basically we're going to run this through here. And when we run that through there, we're going to install more of these little spacers. The little 4mm, little tiny ones. So we're going to run that on here inside. Okay, you can't really see with my hands in the way. I'll just do it and then I'll show you what I did. Because this is exceptionally hard to hang on to. And you can't get your fingers in there. Okay, so we'll pull that back. We're going to do another one of these. Should have been using this the whole time. Oh, that's good. Okay, I wouldn't have tightened these down if I thought I had to do this still. that's what we just got done doing. We just added this extra one in here. Same height, same everything as the other one. A little bit confusing. So I already tightened these, right? Now is when it's telling me to tighten them. So apparently I can't read instructions too well, but what's new? So we'll tighten that. We already have the M3 tight, but we'll just give it a little extra for good measure. And it wants us to turn it upside down and set it aside so this one doesn't fall out. They don't want us to put the nut on there yet for some reason. So set that over there, and we move on to building the next one. Building this one is another example of rinse and repeat. Pretty much identical to the other one, but I do approach it a little bit differently. Here I'm pre-tightening that pulley again just so it doesn't fall off. But here you get a better view of that flat part of the shaft that I'm tightening that set screw up against. Now we're doing the same thing with a bolt and one of the small shims. And we're going to push it through this outer hole. And then we're going to start building on top of that. So again, we have two of these little spacers. We have the sandwich. And then we have one of these spacers. And because I didn't like how they had me do it last time, I'm going to skip ahead. And I'm going to do this. Yeah, same thing. Two of these. And then we build this. So again, I'm just holding these with my fingers on the back side to hold those up. And is this what it's saying? Yeah, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but basically it's having me do the exact same thing. Well, and they did ask me to do it a different order than I did it. So do that. I think maybe the reason they don't do this is because it takes maybe a little more effort to hold everything in place. But personally, I prefer this to the first method. And I think so this doesn't fall out, I'm just going to set this here so I don't have to hold it. And we'll come back and remove that one after. But I should be able to tighten this. Pop that in there. We'll tighten this one, this outside one. Okay, so we have that tight. Wants me to tighten everything and leave it upside down without this on there, but right now it's just barely sitting on there enough to hold it in place. And I'm gonna leave it because I don't wanna worry about that. Okay, so we have our two assemblies that we just built, and I almost just pulled that out of there. So we have our two assemblies built. The next step is to install this motor mount up on this side here. Do the same thing with the opposite side. So we're gonna begin doing that. If you notice, they did have me removing this or leaving this screw loose. And the reason for that is because we will be replacing it with this. So what they advise is to swap them just like that. Although I skipped a step, so we're gonna have to come back. I forgot to add, we need to add this part, this little sandwich part in here first. We're just gonna undo what we did. That should be pretty quick and painless. No big deal. Okay, so this part should go down here, just like so. I get sandwiched in there. Then this piece goes down. Remove this screw so we don't need it anymore. And then we have a bunch of spacers to put throughout here. Okay, I have all the parts I need. So let's begin. I previously aligned the T-nut that's inside here, so this should drop right through and thread into that. We'll make sure it threads. I think we got it. Next one. We're going to do this all the way around. So there's 4 of these holes. Seems like a lot of threads. I think I'm actually threading through the 3D printed part a little bit. Anywhere you can run a bolt in with your fingers, you're generally better off. A lot of times it's faster trying to run a wrench. Okay, so I believe all of these components tighten down quite nicely. Although the little sandwich bit seems a little odd, but I think we're okay. I think once I tighten everything, we should definitely be in business here. Okay, so that feels pretty solid there. One thing I didn't do is put that M5 nut on this bolt that's hidden in here. Otherwise you probably can't see it from that angle. Take a closer look at both of these when we're done with both sides. Okay, so that feels pretty solid. We're going to add this in here, this nylon locking nut. Okay, I got it started there with my fingers, hoping I can get a wrench on it, which it looks like we can. And then I'm hoping I can reach in and tighten it from down here. I get some progress. Okay, so that should be solid. That feels pretty solid there. So you can see now the two motors stack. Now we're looking at it from the back side. But you can see that both those motors are there. Let's try not to make the same mistake we made on the other side. We'll put the spacer this time first. Okay. I feel like that's okay. So this one I put this nut in here. So we're going to remove that quick. This bolt that's sticking up will replace that. Worked pretty well. This M5 nut on there. I know I did this last before, but honestly it makes zero difference. In theory it should be easier to do now, but that's not proving to be the case. There we go. That started anyway. One thing I am going to do a little different, but oh, I can't do that. Alright, still loose. Which is what we need because we have to get all these bolts put in place. Okay. That's the reason you don't want to tighten anything too early, because it gets really hard to put in other pieces when the tightening is a little off balance. Okay, so now that everything's in place though, we can go ahead and tighten these. That, and now we still need to tighten this last little M5 that's hidden in this corner over here. Okay, that is not going anywhere. Now we can take a closer look at how the motors are starting to come together. So the bottom ones there, like I said, were for the COREXY, and the top one is for hybrid. In the case of just the hybrid setup, those motors only add additional speed to the y-axis, but with the IDEX, they're actually required because the lower two motors aren't enough to control both tool heads in both X and Y directions. Next step on this is to assemble the tensioners. So these little pieces here are the tensioner itself, and basically they're going to fit into these slots with a screw that goes in the back side, and when you tighten that, it's going to pull this in and provide tension on the cables or the belt. So that's pretty cool. We're going to go ahead and assemble this quick. It's pretty simple from what I can tell. We make another one of these tensioner or pulley sandwiches, like I keep calling it. So now I have to assemble this whole stack in here. It'd be easier said than done. Maybe one at a time. Yep, that's the plan. We're going to do one at a time. I think the washer is going to be one of the harder parts. Still going to use the pliers here. Okay, we're going to do one of those. One of these, one of these, And then this might be the hard part. It's trying to sandwich this in there. A couple ways I can do this. I think I could pull this into place there. Ha! Got it. And we'll just tighten this. So that should be good. So there's one tensioner. I'm just going to go ahead and build all of them real quick. One thing about this build and a lot of other projects like this is it's a lot of repetition. So once you get things figured out for the first time and you get a really good setup going, you can just rock and roll and knock out the rest of them. And so that's what I'm doing here, just doing all these exactly the same as the first one. All right, we have 4 tensioners. Next step is pretty simple, but there's a little key piece of information there. They show you want to assemble this so it's started, but not so much because you want to make sure you have lots of adjustment. This screw is what's going to build the tension in those belts. So you want a little bit, but not too much. I also am opting to put the screw in from the top, so there's no way it can fall out. So we got a few turns on each of those. That side's almost done. Now we're just going to prepare these little grub screws, set screws, so that when we finally get everything where we want it, we can tighten these. Okay, so this side's done. Okay, we're back again. I've prepared all the parts down here for doing the X-axis, and that's actually the piece that will ride on these rails that we've installed in the last one. We've got all the belt tensioning stuff in place up front. We've got all the pulleys and motors installed in the back. So now we're going to go ahead and assemble all the X-axis components. And there's quite a few different parts that I have splayed out here. I tried to do everything so we could just run through and assemble it. It's a lot of small pieces, so I'm going to bring you in real close and we're going to work on assembling that. Okay, so to get started, these are the parts that we have laid out. These will all get assembled on the ends of this, which is where the rail will go for the X-axis. So we're going to start with one of these plates and we're just going to start assembling things. So it starts with a couple screws. These are all in the manual. It does make it pretty straightforward. Interestingly enough, they have a non-countersunk screw for a countersunk hole. Okay, we're going to flip this over. I'm just going to keep my fingers on there. We're going to install a bunch of these little spacers on each one of these. See what I did here? This next part, there's these little spacers. These are 3D printed, but they're going to go over top of this. And all those aluminum pieces that we put in, they're going to slide through these holes. And I think that allows us, so when we tighten everything up, it's not actually compressing the 3D print. And I suspected this might be a little bit more difficult to get all these to fit through. Okay, there we go. Just took a little bit of pressure. There you have it. Looks pretty nice. Moving on, we take one of these top plates and we'll install that. Maybe I should just set this on the ground for now. We just installed the plate on top of here. Now we're going to start installing the idler pulleys. So these would be the pulleys that actually are either pulling the Y-axis gantry back and forth or moving the tool head on the X-axis. And this is very familiar. The flange bearings with the normal bearing sandwiched in between them. And then we add some more spacers. So in this case, short spacers where there's already a pulley, and back here, and then these two get the longer spacers. Right now I think we're going to move this on. Just set this aside. We're going to do a little bit of work on this rail here. So I'll bring you over to this end. These are a little bit different. There we go. These are the little square ones. You actually have to insert them. You can't drop them in. So we're going to put 2 on the top. And we're going to add 1 on the bottom. Okay, so there's 2 up on top, there's 1 on the bottom. And then we want to take one of these pieces. So this is a 3D printed spacer, sort of alignment. This is what mounts everything to the end cap. Okay, so that fits pretty snug. It's a good fit actually. We have both of these in here in place on this side. If we flip it over, this other one is actually underneath here, and we want to line it up with that hole. I don't think we're going to use that yet, but we definitely want it aligned with this hole. So that's what I'm doing there, making sure that's aligned. So I'm going to flip this back over, try not to slide that, and both of these are up tight against this edge as well. We're going to move on with this other part that we had already previously put together. Set this down like this, and we're going to put this over top here. Alright, so just like that. Although it seems like it needs to go down a little further. You know what? I think I know what it is. I think this low profile screw is actually hitting the nut, and so the only way to make this go down all the way is to tighten this. Oh, I didn't like that. I was right though. I pulled everything back together. I'm really trying not to lose any of the stuff I've assembled on here. Okay, so the screws are back through. Should be in good shape there. So now we got those through. Everything's assembled. Now what it wants us to do is do another idler up here. So we're going to do flange, no flange, flange, and one of the precision. Okay, so next we're going to take one of these joiner plates, I think they're calling it. We're going to put that on top here, and now everything's starting to come together. And you can actually see why they wanted these nuts inserted where they are, because these are going to tie. Oh, that's magnetic. That's helpful. Those are going to apply here. Now that we've got that, we need to put the locking nuts on. I'm going to flip it over and we're going to tighten these. I wonder if this would be faster. 100%. There's the completed part. Okay, so I think we're gonna grab the mallet potentially. So this piece fit right on there. And we have 4 screws we got to put in. This is that top piece. These 2 and these 2 are threaded. So that's what I'm screwing into here. Again, through a 3D printed part, so we don't want to go too tight. I thought I was done last time, but here's the actual finished part. Alright, now we're going to move on to this side of things. It's going to look very similar. Prepared for the next step in the manual, which is to put these 2 together. Should look very, very similar to the other side. Alright. Those are coming together. Now the thing that I find interesting is that it says to do this other screw last, but I found I needed to do it first in order for all this to sandwich together the way it's supposed to. So this should be in there grabbing that T-nut. Okay, now we'll flip it back over. Now that we have all this assembled, we're going to go ahead and build another idler pulley on this side. I don't know if idler is the right term, let's be honest. There's a lot of pulleys, a lot of these in this build. Now we can cap everything off. It was a little tight. I think there was something in this plastic 3D printed part that was causing this spacer down here to be in a weird spot. And actually looking at it now, I see a crack, so I'm not a huge fan of that. Pretty hard to see. There's a little crack right where my fingernail is. We want to add the M5 locking nuts on. Okay, now we're onto the spot I thought I was, or the step I thought I was in a little bit ago. I'm going to pop this on. Make sure that's where we want it. Install these little guys. Okay, so the next step here is going to be to install the rail on this X-axis. Just taking a little bit of the excess oil off. I'm going really gently though, because I don't want to take all of it off. There's some benefit to having that there. They definitely need to have a light film of oil. Keep from rusting and just keep everything running how it should. But what I'm doing should hopefully keep it from being a little bit too over the top, and I think any dirt and different things can kind of stick to that. So, alright, so we're getting close here. Pop these end caps off. Those keep these rails or these carriages in place so they don't shoot off the end. If I was doing, or I wasn't doing the IDEX, I would take one of these off. But because I am going to, we're gonna keep it on. So we're gonna go ahead and start assembling this.
I'm definitely cruising through a lot of these steps at this point. You've seen a lot of this stuff done already, so in terms of preparing the T-nuts and getting everything ready to drop in, at this point in the build, it's fairly self-explanatory, and I want to make sure we can focus on the important stuff. With this one, it's really no different than the others.
I use the same alignment spacers, or not the same ones, but the same style. I thought I was done with this frame jig from the first chapter, but apparently that's going to fit in here, and that's how we're going to space. Wow, that seems kind of wild, but okay, we're going to space that. I don't know if you can see what I'm doing. Basically, I'm squeezing that with the rail to locate it. Okay. Should be good there. Should be done with those. They must have sized it just right so these can't fall off. Alright, as you might have guessed, the next step with this is to install it on the machine. So we're going to do that next.
As you can see here, the X-axis sits on those carriages that we previously installed on the Y-axis. One of the things I tried to describe on camera when I was building this is I was fairly concerned about binding with these rails. It's actually something I ran into when I built my CNC machine, and that is that these linear rails have very little free movement because the tolerances are so tight, and if everything is perfectly rigid, if it's not absolutely parallel, it's going to bind. So I was pretty concerned about that here, but it ended up not being that big of an issue.
I swear the smaller these screws get, the harder and harder they are to assemble with just your fingers. Okay, moving over to the other side. This is where we get to decide if this is going to bind or not. Everything's lining up right now pretty good. Like I said, we'll see when we actually go to tighten stuff. Let me move this so you can see what's going on here. Just going through, but a little bit of tension on each of these. Okay, so it's kind of hard to see this, but see it on the screen. But basically what I'm doing is I push this all the way to the front, and it needs to hit both of these at the same time. And right now it's not. So I'm going to loosen each one of these so that we can get these twisted to where they need to be. Okay, so now we're right up where we want to be. I'll put a little bit of tension on these. That's actually amazing. I thought there's a large potential of it binding. It's definitely tighter back here than up here. So one thing they say you can do is loosen the rails themselves, which I think I might do.
One thing I learned while recording myself during this build is that I'm not exactly the best at explaining something while I'm actually doing the build. What I was trying to say here is that there's just enough play in those screw holes to allow the rail enough adjustment to make itself perfectly parallel to the other one. And so if I can loosen one side and use the rail, the X-rail itself, to push it to the right distance, and I do it just a little bit at a time as you can see me doing here, I can make sure that at each point it's exactly the same distance from one rail to the next. And that should ensure that both rails are perfectly parallel. And it sort of uses the right one as a fixed point, and the other one will float into place.
Oh, that was still loose. Beautiful. So now you could start to see how this is starting to look like a 3D printer.
Seeing all these components come together like this is really exciting because the printer is starting to feel much more like a printer. The next step is to install the belts. Now this is the part that starts to deviate between the COREXY, the IDEX, or the hybrid builds, but we're gonna have to wait until the next video because this one's getting pretty long. So everyone, thanks for sticking around, and I will see you in the next video.